Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I found my face in a deepfake video on the dark web. The things they show me doing are horrifying. So, let me start by saying that this whole thing feels like it came out of nowhere. I'm not the kind of guy who stumbles into trouble, at least not usually. I've got a decent job, some close friends, and a pretty uneventful life. Or, I did until a few weeks ago, when everything flipped upside down. A few of my buddies from work had been talking about the dark web, just to joke around. They're the type of guys who are obsessed with tech and all the stuff that comes with it. They're constantly pulling pranks, looking up weird videos, and digging into the kind of online rabbit holes that I've always avoided. But after hearing them joke about it for weeks, I guess my curiosity got the better of me. I remember thinking it couldn't be as bad as everyone says, right? Like, it's mostly urban legends or overblown stuff meant to scare you. I figured, why not check it out? I didn't plan on doing anything illegal. I just wanted to poke around, maybe see some weird forums or whatever. After watching a couple of YouTube tutorials and reading some guides, I downloaded the Tor browser and started clicking through the most basic stuff. Nothing crazy. At first, it was kind of underwhelming. A lot of broken links, random marketplaces selling drugs, which I stayed far away from, and some conspiracy theory forums that felt like bad Reddit knockoffs. Honestly, I was starting to think it was all just hype, but then I found this site. It didn't have a real name, just a string of random characters followed by a .onion URL. I have no idea how I even got to it. It was one of those late night sessions where you're half awake, clicking on whatever looked interesting. The site itself was bare, just a black screen with a chat box in the middle and some kind of link beneath it. The link had no description, no hints about what it led to, just a file name, faceofyou.mp4. Now, here's where I messed up. Normally, I'm not a reckless guy. I'm actually pretty cautious online, but this time, I don't know what I was thinking. I should have known better, but curiosity really gets the best of you sometimes. I clicked on the link. It didn't download though. Instead, it started streaming the video right there on the page. My heart dropped the moment it began. The video was shaky, like it was filmed on someone's phone, and the lighting was dim. Just some street lamps casting long shadows over a small, empty parking lot. At first, it didn't seem that weird. It was just a quiet night scene, nothing creepy. But then, I noticed something that stopped me cold. There was someone in the frame. At first, they were too far away for me to make out, but the camera slowly zoomed in, and my blood ran cold. It was me. Like, it wasn't someone who looked like me. It was me, wearing the exact same hoodie I had on that day. I was standing in the middle of the parking lot, facing away from the camera, but I recognized the clothes immediately. It felt like the air had been sucked out of my room. How was this possible? I hadn't left my apartment all night. My first thought was that it had to be some sort of prank. Maybe one of those deepfake videos you hear about. The ones where they swap someone's face onto a different person's body. But it wasn't just my face. It was my clothes, my posture, even the way I stood. Everything. The longer I stared at it, the more unsettling it became. It looked too real. The camera kept zooming in closer until it was only a few feet behind the version of me on the screen. And then the figure turned around slowly, like they knew they were being watched. When I saw the face, my stomach lurched. It wasn't just a deepfake. It was me, down to every detail. The eyes, the nose, even the tiny scar I have near my eyebrow from when I fell off my bike as a kid. But here's where it got really messed up. The me on screen wasn't just standing there anymore. As I watched, the face, my face, stretched into this weird, distorted smile. I don't mean a normal smile. It was this creepy, unnatural grin, like someone had grabbed the corners of my mouth and pulled them upward way too far. My eyes, my own eyes, looked dead, almost like they were staring right through the screen and into me. I was frozen. I couldn't look away, even though every instinct was screaming at me to close the laptop, to just stop watching. But before I could, the screen went black. The whole video couldn't have been more than 30 seconds long, but it felt like an eternity. I sat there in silence for what felt like hours, just staring at the screen, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Was it some kind of elaborate joke? Was someone messing with me? Or worse, was it something else? I slammed the laptop shut, feeling like I had crossed some line I shouldn't have. The worst part was that I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. You know that sensation when you can just feel eyes on you? Yeah, that was me, sitting in my empty apartment, hearing every tiny creak and rustle, convinced that there was something just out of sight. But I tried to brush it off. It was late. I was tired, and I probably just spooked myself. That's what I told myself anyway. I didn't sleep much that night. If only I had stopped there. If only I hadn't gone back to that website the next day, things might not have gotten so strange. But I did. And that's when everything started spiraling out of control. So I told myself I wouldn't go back to that site. After what I saw, any normal person would have just wiped their browser history and moved on, right? But there was something about it that I couldn't shake. It wasn't just the video itself. It was the way it felt like a personal attack, like whoever made it knew me. And that's what kept gnawing at me. I spent the next day at work completely distracted. Every time someone walked past my desk, I half expected them to bring up that video, like they'd seen it too. But of course, no one did. It was just another boring day at the office. By the time I got home, I had convinced myself it was all some weird coincidence. Maybe I had clicked on some prank site, and my mind was blowing it out of proportion. But when I sat down in front of my laptop that night, my curiosity got the better of me again. I hesitated for a good 5 minutes before finally opening the Tor browser. I told myself I wasn't going to do anything crazy. Just check if the video was still there. Maybe poke around the site to see if there were any clues about who made it. When I pulled up the page though, the video was gone. The chat box was still there, just sitting in the middle of the screen like before. But that link, the one that led to faceofyou.mp4, had disappeared. In its place was a new one, faceofyou2.mp4. I stared at the screen, my mouth dry. My gut told me to leave it alone, to close the browser and never look at this page again. But instead, I clicked it. I'm not even sure why. It was like something was pulling me in, like some invisible force wouldn't let me walk away. This time, the video opened up to a completely different scene. No parking lot, no street lamps. It was inside an apartment. Not just any apartment, my apartment. I felt my stomach twist as I recognized the furniture, the way everything was arranged. It was my living room, down to every last detail. The camera was pointed at my couch, the same couch I was sitting on right at that moment. And then, there I was, again. I was sitting on the couch in the video, dressed exactly the same as I was at that moment. It was almost like I was watching a live feed, but the longer I watched, the more I realized it wasn't live at all. The me on the screen was just staring, blank, motionless. His face, my face, looked hollow, like there was nothing behind the eyes. I leaned closer, trying to figure out what was going on, but the more I watched, the more uneasy I felt. The version of me on screen didn't move. He just sat there, staring straight ahead. Then, slowly, his head turned toward the camera. His lips stretched into that same grotesque smile from the first video, the kind of smile that looked like it hurt. And then, he stood up. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. The me in the video walked across the room, my room, toward the camera. With each step, the screen flickered, like there was some kind of interference. As he got closer, I realized he wasn't walking toward the camera. He was walking toward me. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I do. But in that moment, it felt like the figure on the screen was going to reach through and grab me. I couldn't tear my eyes away. I watched as his face came into full view. My own face, but distorted, like it had been stretched too far in places. The smile still glued to his face. And then the screen cut to black. I sat there, staring at the blank screen for what felt like forever. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. It was like someone was watching me, recording me. But how? There were no cameras in my apartment, no windows in the living room that someone could spy through. My place was a one-bedroom with a decent lock. I'd lived there for years, and nothing like this had ever happened before. I slammed my laptop shut again, my hands shaking. This time, though, I didn't just sit there. I got up and started searching my apartment, looking for anything out of place. Hidden cameras, bugs, anything. I checked every inch of the walls, the vents, even tore through my bedroom, looking for something that could explain how that video had been filmed. Nothing. Not a single thing. But then, when I went back into the living room, I noticed something I had missed earlier. On the couch, right where I had been sitting, was a single piece of paper. I didn't remember it being there before, and I sure as hell hadn't put it there. It was a small, folded note. My heart was pounding as I picked it up and unfolded it. The handwriting was messy, almost scrawled, but I could still make it out. It said, "Stop watching." That's it. Just 2 words, but they hit me like a truck. My hands were shaking even harder now, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples. Someone had been in my apartment. Someone had left this note, and I hadn't heard a damn thing. I ran to the door and checked the lock. It was still bolted, just like I had left it. The windows were all shut tight, no signs of forced entry. But somehow, someone had been inside, close enough to leave that note without me noticing. I wanted to call someone, the police maybe, but what the hell was I going to tell them? That I found a weird video of myself on the dark web, and now someone was leaving cryptic notes in my apartment. They'd think I was losing my mind. Hell, I was starting to think I was losing my mind. But deep down, I knew something was watching me. Something I couldn't explain. And the worst part? I wasn't even sure if I could stop myself from going back. It was like a nightmare you can't wake up from. Something pulling me deeper, even though I knew it wasn't going to end well. I didn't sleep that night either. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smile, the twisted, unnatural grin on my own face, staring at me like it knew something I didn't. By morning, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let this thing control me. I wasn't going to go back to the site. But as the day wore on, the fear started turning into something else. A question I couldn't ignore. What if there was another video? By the time the next night rolled around, I felt like I was losing it. Every little noise in my apartment made me jump. A creak from the old wooden floor, the hum of the refrigerator. It all seemed louder, more menacing. I kept checking my phone, scrolling mindlessly through apps just to distract myself. I kept thinking about that note. Stop watching. I should have stopped. Any sane person would have. But instead, I found myself pacing around the living room, my laptop sitting closed on the coffee table, taunting me. Every time I looked at it, my heart started racing. What if there was another video? What if it was worse than the others? Or maybe, just maybe, it would have some kind of answer. I told myself I wasn't going to open it. I even tried going to bed early, but I just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. My thoughts were racing. The memory of that grinning version of me burned into my brain. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw the blankets off and got up, my feet dragging me toward the living room like I was on autopilot. Before I even realized what I was doing, I had opened the laptop again. The Tor browser was still there, minimized, but waiting. One click, and I was staring at that damn black screen again. The chat box was empty. No new messages, no clues, nothing. But at the bottom of the page, a new link had appeared. Face of you, 3.mp4. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the link. My stomach felt like it was tied in knots. I thought about the note again. Stop watching, but something inside me clicked, like I was past the point of no return. I needed to see what was next. I clicked. The video started, and this time, it was different. It wasn't outside, and it wasn't my apartment, at least not at first. It was a hallway. Not just any hallway, though. It was the hallway outside my apartment door. The camera was shaky, like whoever was holding it was walking, and the footsteps echoed quietly off the walls. I recognized everything. The faded carpet, the dull beige paint, even the number on the door across the hall from mine. My breath caught in my throat as the camera kept moving, inching closer to my door. Then, just like that, it stopped. The camera zoomed in on my door, my apartment number clearly visible. I felt my pulse in my neck, a rising panic clawing at my insides. The camera stayed fixed on the door for what felt like forever, until the screen suddenly cut to black. For a second, I thought the video was over, but then the screen flickered back on. This time, the view was inside my apartment again. My apartment, from the exact same angle as the second video. The camera was in the living room, pointed at the couch where I was sitting right then. I couldn't breathe. The me in the video was sitting there again, but this time, he wasn't staring blankly. This time, he was looking right at me. The twisted smile was gone, replaced by something worse, something more aware. His eyes followed me, even though I wasn't moving. It was like he could see me through the screen, like he was watching me in real time. He stood up. I didn't know what to do. My brain was screaming at me to close the laptop, but my body was frozen. I watched as the me on screen started walking toward the camera again, slow and deliberate, like he knew exactly what he was doing. The flickering started again, just like before, the screen glitching as he moved closer. And then the camera angle shifted. It was like the person filming had stepped back or turned slightly. I could see more of the room now. but something was off. My heart stopped when I realized what it was. The reflection in the TV. There was someone else there. It wasn't me, and it wasn't the version of me in the video. It was another figure, standing just out of frame, their shape barely visible in the TV's reflection. They were taller than me, their body cloaked in shadows. I could only make out the outline of their head, but it was distorted, misshapen, like it had been stretched or twisted in some unnatural way. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, looming behind the me on screen, like some silent watcher. The me in the video stopped moving, like he could feel the presence behind him. Slowly, he turned to face the figure. As soon as he did, the screen went black again. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I slammed the laptop shut, my hand shaking so bad I could barely stand. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew one thing for sure. Someone, or something, was messing with me. And they were getting closer. I scrambled to my feet, pacing around the room like a trapped animal. I didn't know what to do. Call the cops? What would I even tell them? There were no cameras, no signs of forced entry, nothing to prove that any of this was real. And yet, it felt real. Too real. I checked the windows again. Still locked. The door was still bolted. I even pulled open the closet, checking every corner, but there was nothing there. No one. Just me, alone in my apartment. But it didn't feel like I was alone. Then my phone buzzed. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was sitting on the coffee table, face down. I didn't even want to look at it, but my hand moved on its own, reaching for it, like I couldn't stop myself. It was a text. Stop watching. That was it. No number, no contact info, just the message. Stop watching. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. How had someone gotten my number? Was it the same person who had been in my apartment? Or was it someone else? And why were they telling me to stop? I wanted to stop. I really did. But there was something gnawing at the back of my mind, some horrible, twisted curiosity that wouldn't let go. What if there was a fourth video? I wish I could say I was smart enough to walk away. I really do. After that text, after what I'd seen, I should have been done. But something inside me, maybe it was fear, maybe it was just sheer stupidity, wouldn't let it go. I paced my apartment for what felt like hours, phone in hand, staring at that text like it was some kind of puzzle I could solve if I just stared long enough. Stop watching. It was a warning. That much was obvious. But from who? Someone trying to help me, or the same person, thing, that had been screwing with my life? Was this a threat? Or maybe, just maybe, it was too late to stop. The next night, I barely slept. Every noise outside my apartment made me bolt upright, heart racing, convinced that something, or someone, was standing just outside my door, waiting for the right moment to break in. I kept replaying the videos in my head, over and over, wondering who was filming them, who had access to my apartment, and more importantly, why me? By the time morning came, I was exhausted, but no less obsessed. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was another video waiting for me. And despite every fiber of my being screaming at me to stop, I opened my laptop again. The chat box was still empty. No new messages, no notes, just the same blank, black page I had grown far too familiar with. But at the bottom, there it was. Another link. Face of you 4.mp4. I felt sick, physically nauseous. My whole body was tense, my hands shaking as I stared at the link. I knew deep down that clicking it was the worst decision I could make. But I clicked it anyway. My hands moved on their own. I couldn't stop. The video opened like the others, only this time there was no shaky camera, no hallway, no living room shot. It was dark, so dark that at first I thought the video wasn't working, just a black screen. But slowly, as my eyes adjusted, I could make out something in the background. Small movements, shifting shapes, like shadows. And then the camera panned, and I saw it. It was me again, but this time, I wasn't just standing or sitting. I was lying down, motionless, in what looked like a small, dark room. The walls were bare concrete, stained and grimy, with no windows, no doors visible. Just me, lying there on a slab, like some kind of morgue table. My heart was in my throat. It was too real. The angle, the way the light barely illuminated my face. It looked like I was dead. My skin was pale, almost gray, and my eyes were closed. Then, the camera moved closer. I was holding my breath, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The figure on the table, me, just lay there, completely still, as the camera zoomed in closer and closer. I could see every detail, every line on my face, the way my fingers were curled slightly, my chest completely still. No rise and fall of breath, no movement at all. And then I saw it, just behind the table, barely visible in the shadows, the outline of the same distorted figure from the reflection in the previous video. It was standing there, watching. The camera didn't focus on it, almost like whoever was filming didn't want me to see it clearly. But it was there, looming in the background, its misshapen head cocked slightly, as if it was studying me, studying itself. The screen flickered again, just for a split second, and when the image came back, my eyes were open. Not the eyes of the version of me lying on the table, the eyes of the figure watching from the shadows. They were locked on the camera, unblinking. The rest of the body remained still, but those eyes, they felt like they were burning into me, seeing right through the screen, right through me. The version of me on the slab slowly sat up. The motion was slow, jerky, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. The head tilted, that same grotesque grin creeping across my face. But it wasn't like before. It was worse. The smile stretched too far, almost tearing the skin, my eyes glossy and empty, staring straight ahead as my body moved without any life behind it. And then the figure stepped forward from the shadows. This thing was wearing my face too, but it wasn't right. Its head was too long, its limbs too thin, almost stretched out like it had been pulled apart and stitched back together wrong. It moved inhumanly, too smooth, too fluid, like it was gliding rather than walking. It reached out a hand, long and pale, and touched the version of me on the slab. My skin crawled as the me in the video responded, looking up at the creature with that same dead smile, like they were sharing some kind of sick private joke. The creature leaned in closer, its face only inches from mine, and for the first time, it spoke. I couldn't hear what it said. The audio was distorted, a low, garbled mess of static and faint whispers. But whatever it was, the figure on the table nodded slowly, its smile growing even wider. The screen flickered again, and everything went black. I sat there, staring at the dark screen, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I felt like I was going to be sick. My brain was scrambling to make sense of what I'd just seen, but it couldn't. Nothing made sense anymore. I should have been scared out of my mind. I was scared, but more than that, I felt violated, like whoever or whatever was making these videos had taken something from me, had stolen a piece of my life and twisted it into something monstrous. I wanted to scream, to throw my laptop across the room and be done with it all, but instead, I just sat there, paralyzed by the horrifying realization that this wasn't over. This wasn't just some sick prank. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't going to stop. And then, just as I was about to close the laptop, something popped up on the screen. A message. Simple. Chilling. You are the fifth. I didn't know what it meant at first. The fifth what? But then it hit me. I wasn't the only one. There had been others before me. Other people, other faces, other lives twisted and warped by whatever this thing was. I slammed the laptop shut, my hand shaking uncontrollably. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Was this real? Was I even real anymore? Or was I just another puppet for whatever had made those videos? As I sat there, trying to make sense of everything, I heard something. A soft sound, barely audible over the pounding in my ears. A faint scratching coming from just outside my door. The scratching at my door wasn't loud. It was subtle, almost like something was deliberately trying not to be heard. But in the dead silence of my apartment, it might as well have been a scream. I froze. My eyes locked on the door across the room. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. Maybe it was the pipes, or a neighbor, or the wind. But deep down, I knew better. Something was there. The scratching grew more deliberate, like fingernails scraping against wood, slow and methodical. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my skull, the blood rushing through my ears as I waited for whatever was outside to show itself. I stood up slowly, inching toward the door without making a sound. I don't know why I moved. I should have stayed put, but it was like something was pulling me closer. I reached out with a trembling hand, barely breathing, and looked through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty, the dim light flickering like it always did, casting long shadows across the worn carpet. But the scratching hadn't stopped. It was still there, right on the other side of the door. I stepped back, heart racing, trying to figure out what to do. I could call the cops, but what would I tell them? There's something scratching at my door, but I can't see it. I glanced around the apartment, searching for something, anything that could protect me. A kitchen knife, a chair, something to barricade the door with. But before I could move, my phone buzzed. I nearly dropped it, the vibration startling me out of my panic. I snatched it off the coffee table, my hands trembling as I turned it over. Another text, just like before. Check your laptop. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to. I couldn't. Not after what I'd seen. But I didn't have a choice. Something had trapped me in this nightmare, and I couldn't escape. Slowly, I sat back down on the couch, my hands slick with sweat as I opened the laptop again. The black screen greeted me, cold and empty. No new links, no chat box, just a blank page. For a moment, I thought maybe it was over. Maybe whatever had been tormenting me had stopped. But then, the screen flickered. A new video appeared. This time, it didn't have a name. Just an empty play button in the center of the screen, waiting for me to press it. I stared at it, my fingers hovering over the trackpad, my whole body tense. I knew I shouldn't. I knew that whatever I was about to see was going to make everything worse. But the scratching at the door hadn't stopped, and I was trapped. I clicked play. The video started, and this time, there was no shaky camera, no glitching, no strange reflections. It was crystal clear, too clear. It was my apartment again, but not just any view of my apartment. It was the exact angle of the room I was sitting in right now. The couch, the coffee table, the door. Everything was identical to how it looked at that very moment, except I wasn't alone. There, standing by the door, was the figure. The same thing from the previous videos, the same thing with a twisted version of my face. But now, it was fully in view, no shadows, no distortion. Its body was wrong, too tall, too thin, limbs too long and gangly, like a human silhouette stretched beyond what it should be. But its face, it was me, but not. The skin was pulled too tight, the grin was too wide, eyes too dark. It wasn't a deepfake anymore. It was worse. It was standing just inside the door, facing the camera, watching me as I watched it. In the video, the version of me on screen slowly stood up from the couch. I watched, breathless, as the figure moved with slow, jerky steps toward the camera, its smile never faltering. My heart was hammering in my chest. I glanced at my own door, half expecting to see it burst open at any moment. Then the camera panned toward the couch, and there I was. The me in the video was sitting exactly where I was, wearing the same clothes, staring at the same screen. But I wasn't moving. The version of me on screen just sat there, completely still, eyes wide and blank, like a mannequin propped up in my place. It was too real, too close. I felt like I was watching myself through a window, like I was trapped in a loop that I couldn't break. The figure stepped closer to the motionless version of me on the couch, its long, twisted hand reaching out. I could barely breathe as I watched it place its hand on my shoulder, and lean in, its face only inches from mine. I could see every horrible detail of its face, the way its skin seemed to sag unnaturally, like it wasn't meant to be there. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, it whispered. The sound was distorted, barely audible, like it was coming through a wall of static, but I could make out the words, "You're next." The screen cut to black. I slammed the laptop shut, my entire body trembling. The room felt like it was closing in on me, like I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The scratching at the door had stopped, replaced by an eerie, suffocating silence. I sat there, gripping the sides of the laptop, trying to convince myself this wasn't happening, that none of this was real. And then I heard it, a soft, deliberate knock at the door. I froze, my pulse racing. This wasn't scratching anymore. It was a knock. Someone was out there. Something was out there. My heart pounded in my chest, and every instinct screamed at me not to move, not to make a sound, but I couldn't stop myself. Slowly, shakily, I stood up and walked toward the door, my feet barely making a sound on the old wooden floor. The knock came again, louder this time. My hand hovered over the doorknob, shaking. I had to know. I had to see. I held my breath and yanked the door open. There was no one there. The hallway was empty. No figure, no shadows, nothing. Just the same flickering light and worn-out carpet. My whole body was trembling, my mind racing. I slammed the door shut, bolting it and backing away, my heart still pounding in my chest. But then I saw it. Lying on the floor, just inside my doorway, was a small USB drive. It hadn't been there before. I hadn't heard anyone drop it. It was just there, waiting for me. I stared at it, my hands still shaking, trying to decide what to do. I knew, deep down, what was on it. The final video. I never should have watched it. I never should have opened that door. I was hired to test a new dating app on the dark web. I matched with someone who died last year. Alright, so I know this sounds crazy, but hear me out. I'm just your average 22-year-old guy, scraping by in a small, run-down apartment with my cat, Jasper. I don't really do anything special, work a crappy 9-to-5 data entry job, and spend my evenings gaming or mindlessly scrolling through the internet. That's where this whole thing started. A few weeks ago, I was browsing Reddit, lurking like usual, when I stumbled upon a post in a forum that was way deeper down the rabbit hole than I usually go. Someone had posted an opportunity to make quick cash testing out a new dating app. Not like Tinder or Bumble. No, this was different. The post was vague, but it basically said something like, looking for tech-savvy individuals to beta test a new dating platform. Compensation offered, discretion required. It felt sketchy, but I've been broke for a while, and honestly, the thought of making easy money sounded perfect. I figured, worst case scenario, I'd just delete the app and block whoever if things got weird. So I clicked the link, filled out a super simple form, just my email and some basic info, and within an hour, I had a reply. The message came from someone calling themselves Dawn Tech Innovations, which, sounded pretty legit. They offered me $500 up front and another $500 if I completed a week-long test run of their dating app. All I had to do was provide feedback at the end. They said the app wasn't available on the usual app stores because they were still in the early development stages, but they'd send me a direct download link. $1,000 for testing a dating app. I couldn't say no to that. The next day, I got the download link in my email, along with instructions. Here's where things started to get strange. The link wasn't your typical app download. It led me to some sketchy site, and I had to use Tor, a browser you can use to access the dark web, to even open it. Now, I'm not exactly proud to admit it, but I've been on the dark web before. Not for anything crazy, just out of curiosity. I know there are some seriously messed up places on there, but I figured this app couldn't be that bad, right? I was getting paid for this, after all. Once I downloaded the app, it didn't even have a name, just a black icon with some generic heart symbol. But again, $1,000, so I didn't really care. I opened it up, and the interface looked pretty basic, kind of like Tinder, but more stripped down. No fancy colors or animations, just a few profiles that popped up one by one. Most of the people looked like regular users, selfies in bad lighting, awkward bios, stuff like that. I swiped left on a bunch of them just to get a feel for how the app worked. I was about 20 minutes in when I matched with someone who caught my attention. Her name was Sarah. Now, I know this sounds cliche, but there was something off about her profile right from the start. Her picture was super old school. I'm talking grainy, like it had been taken with an old disposable camera. She was smiling, but it didn't reach her eyes, like she was trying to fake it. Her bio was even stranger, just 3 words, looking for you. It gave me chills, but at the same time, I was intrigued. This app was supposed to be in beta testing, so maybe it was all part of the weird aesthetic or some marketing ploy. Curiosity got the best of me, and I swiped right. Immediately, we matched. Within seconds, I got a message. Sarah, I've been waiting for you. Okay, that was weird, right? I just matched with her, and she was already messaging me like we knew each other. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe she was just one of those overly eager users, so I messaged back. Me. Hey, what's up? She didn't respond right away, So I closed the app and went back to my usual routine. But later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I got another notification from the app. Sarah, don't you remember me? Now, I was starting to feel a bit creeped out. I stared at the screen for a while, trying to figure out if this was some sort of prank. Maybe the developers had set up some weird AI to mess with testers. But there was something about her words that felt personal, like she knew me. And that didn't make any sense, because I'd never seen this girl in my life. I decided to reply, more out of curiosity than anything else. Me. I don't think we've met before. Do I know you? I sat there for a while, waiting for her to answer. Nothing. I checked the time. 1:32 a.m. I was tired, so I closed the app and went to bed, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling I had about the whole thing. The next day, I woke up to another message, but this one was different. Sarah, you should have answered sooner. I didn't want it to come to this. There was a picture attached to the message. I hesitated for a second before opening it, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to expect. A creepy selfie, some weird joke maybe. But when I clicked on the image, it wasn't anything like that at all. It was a photo of me, sleeping. I stared at the photo for what felt like an eternity. It was definitely me. Same bed, same messy sheets, even the same hoodie I had thrown on the floor before crashing the night before. The picture was taken from the foot of my bed, like someone had been standing there, watching me sleep. My blood ran cold. I hadn't heard anything. Jasper, my cat, usually freaks out if there's the slightest noise in the apartment, but he had been curled up on my chest all night, dead asleep. I started rationalizing. Maybe this was some elaborate prank set up by the app creators. Maybe they somehow hacked my phone camera and took the picture remotely. But that didn't make sense. The angle was too weird, too specific, like it was taken from inside my room, not from my phone. I checked my front door. It was still locked. The windows were closed. No signs of anyone having been inside. I didn't feel safe, though. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone to jump out of a corner, but the apartment was silent, too silent. I didn't know what to do, so I did what any reasonable person would. I messaged Sarah back. Me. Who took that picture? I waited and waited. Minutes passed. My heart was racing, and I could feel the sweat pooling in my palms. No response. I checked her profile again, trying to see if I could dig up any more info. But when I opened the app, her profile was gone. No match, no messages. It was like she had never existed. At this point, I was fully panicking. I even called a couple of my friends, but none of them picked up. It was too early in the morning for them to be awake. So I sat there, staring at my phone, wondering if I should just delete the app and pretend none of this ever happened. But then, around noon, I got another message. This time, it wasn't from Sarah. It was from an unknown profile. No name, no picture, nothing. Just a blank gray box where the user's profile should have been. The message was short and direct. Unknown. Do you want to know how she died? I felt a lump form in my throat. Was this a sick joke? Who was messing with me? My hands were shaking as I typed back. Me. What are you talking about? Unknown. Sarah. She's dead. I closed the app and threw my phone across the room. There was no way this was real. There had to be some glitch, or I was being trolled by the app developers or something. But the longer I sat there, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I forced myself to go about my day, trying to distract myself. I went out for groceries, took a walk around the block, but everywhere I went, it felt like someone was watching me. Paranoia was setting in. Every person I passed on the street, every stranger I saw through a window, I couldn't help but wonder if they were involved somehow. I even considered going to the police. But what was I going to tell them? That a dating app sent me a picture of myself sleeping and told me I'd matched with a dead girl? Yeah, I could already imagine the looks they'd give me. When I got back home, I decided I needed answers. I couldn't shake the thought that maybe Sarah was real, that maybe something horrible had happened to her, and somehow I was getting tangled up in it. So I did what any amateur internet sleuth would. I Googled her. I couldn't find anything at first. No social media accounts, no local news articles. But after digging through pages of search results, I finally found an old obituary. Sarah Chambers. She had died a year ago in a car accident. Same face, same sad smile from her profile picture. Her family had written a short tribute, talking about how she had been full of life and how her death had left them devastated. There was even a link to a memorial page with photos of her, and I could tell right away it was the same girl. But here's where it got even weirder. The obituary said she had died on October 12th of last year, exactly 1 year to the day that I had matched with her on the app. My stomach dropped. I stared at the date, rereading it over and over, hoping I had somehow gotten it wrong, that it was just some eerie coincidence. But no, the timing was too perfect, too deliberate. I tried to convince myself that it was some messed up marketing ploy. Maybe the developers had planted Sarah's profile to freak people out, using an old obituary to make things more realistic. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I had a sinking feeling in my gut that this was something much worse than a prank. Later that night, I was lying in bed, trying to calm down and convince myself I was overreacting when I heard a notification go off on my phone. I didn't want to check it. I knew it was from the app, but the curiosity was killing me. Reluctantly, I picked up my phone and unlocked the screen. Another message from the unknown profile. Unknown. She's not the only one. And just like before, there was another photo attached. This time, it wasn't of me. It was of my best friend Derek, sitting on his couch, staring blankly at his TV. I recognized his living room instantly. The timestamp on the photo showed it had been taken 5 minutes earlier. I tried calling him immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic surged through me, and I grabbed my keys, rushing out the door and speeding to his place. When I got there, the lights were on, and his front door was cracked open. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I slowly stepped inside, calling his name. No response. I found Derek sitting on the couch, exactly like in the photo, except he wasn't moving. I froze in the doorway, staring at Derek, my heart pounding in my ears. His body was slumped on the couch, motionless, his face pale, eyes half open, like he'd just stopped. For a second, I was paralyzed, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. I must have stood there for a solid minute, waiting for him to blink, to shift, to show any sign that he was still alive. But he didn't. "Derek?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper, the sound barely reaching the space between us. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself forward, each step heavier than the last. As I got closer, the awful truth hit me like a punch to the gut. He was gone. He looked just like he had in the photo, down to the faint shadow of stubble on his chin, his eyes glazed over, staring into nothingness. I shook him, desperate for any reaction. "Derek!" Come on, man. Wake up! I was practically screaming now, my hands gripping his shoulders. But there was nothing. No pulse, no breathing, just cold. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. He had been fine just hours ago. I had texted him that morning. We were supposed to hang out later in the week. There was no way this could be real. It was like I had stepped into some kind of nightmare. I stumbled back, trying to catch my breath, when I noticed something else. His phone was lying on the coffee table, screen lit up. Without thinking, I grabbed it, hoping it might give me some clue. Anything to explain what the hell was going on. The screen was open to a text conversation, and my blood ran cold when I saw the last message. It was from me, except I hadn't sent it. It read, "I'm coming over. Don't lock the door." The timestamp? Exactly 10 minutes before I arrived. I dropped his phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely think straight. This was impossible. I hadn't sent that message. I had never texted him about coming over. Hell, I didn't even know I'd be here until I saw that photo. And yet, there it was. My name, my number, my words. I staggered backward, trying to make sense of it all. But it was like my brain was short-circuiting. Was someone using my phone, hacking into my accounts? But how could they know where I was going before I did? I needed help. I needed answers. But more than anything, I needed to get out of Derek's house. The air felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't explain, like the walls themselves were closing in. I bolted out the door, slamming it behind me, and ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, desperate to escape. As soon as I was inside, I locked the doors and tried to catch my breath. I wasn't thinking straight, but the only thing I could do was go back home and figure this out. Maybe the app, maybe it had something to do with all of this. It had to. None of this started until I downloaded it. I needed to delete it. Maybe that would stop, whatever this was. I sped home, the streets blurring around me, and burst into my apartment, grabbing my phone off the counter where I'd thrown it earlier. The app was still there, mocking me, with its stupid heart icon. I pressed and held it, ready to delete it and wipe my hands clean of this nightmare. But the second my finger hovered over uninstall, my phone lit up with a notification. It was from the app. New message from Sarah. My stomach twisted. I wanted to ignore it, to delete the app and pretend none of this ever happened. But some part of me knew that I couldn't run from it. Not anymore. My fingers moved on their own, opening the message, my heart racing in my chest. "Sarah, you're too late." Attached was another photo. This one was of my apartment, taken from inside. I dropped the phone, panic surging through my body. Whoever, whatever this was, they were here, in my home. I grabbed a kitchen knife, the only thing I could think to arm myself with, and started frantically searching my apartment. I checked every room, every closet, under the bed. Nothing. No one. But the feeling that someone was watching me lingered. I could feel it, that prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the one that makes your instincts scream at you to run. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced that at any second I'd see someone standing there, grinning, waiting for me to drop my guard. But there was no one. I slumped against the wall, trying to calm my nerves. My phone buzzed again. Another message. "Sarah, you can't hide from me." I wanted to scream, to throw my phone across the room, but I forced myself to type back. "Me, what do you want?" There was no response, just the 3 dots that told me she was typing. And then the message came through. "Sarah, the same thing that happened to Derek. You're next." That was it. I was done. I wasn't going to stick around to see what happened next. I grabbed my keys and bolted out of the apartment, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. I jumped in my car and drove aimlessly, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Where was I supposed to go? The police wouldn't believe me. My friends would think I'd lost it. I drove for what felt like hours, my eyes darting to every shadow, every passing car. I kept waiting for someone, to jump out, to finish what had started, but nothing happened. Eventually, I pulled over into some random parking lot, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I couldn't live like this, waiting for whatever was coming. I needed to stop it, but I didn't know how. That's when my phone buzzed one more time. I didn't want to look, but I knew I had to. It wasn't from Sarah this time. It was from the unknown profile. Unknown. It's already done. I stared at the message, trying to understand what it meant. Was I already dead? Was I too late to stop whatever this was? And then, just as I was about to put the phone down, a new message appeared. This one had an address. It was a location about 30 minutes outside of town, out in the middle of nowhere. I didn't know what was there, but I had a feeling that if I wanted to end this, I'd have to go. I sat there for a long time, trying to decide if I was ready to see whatever waited for me at that address. Because deep down, I knew that if I went, I might not come back. I sat in my car, staring at the address on my phone. Part of me wanted to turn off the engine and never look back, to drive as far away from this nightmare as possible. But the other part of me, the part that needed answers, needed closure, was louder. I punched the address into my GPS, and the directions popped up. 30 minutes away, out in the middle of nowhere. A stretch of road I didn't recognize. I knew I had no business going there. Everything about this screamed danger, but at this point, I was too far in. I needed to know why this was happening. I needed to end it, one way or another. The drive was quiet, too quiet. The city lights disappeared behind me as I drove farther into the outskirts, where the only light came from my headlights, cutting through the darkness. The road turned from pavement to gravel, each bump rattling my nerves. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see something or someone following me, but all I saw was an endless stretch of road behind me. Every once in a while, my phone would buzz with another message from Sarah or the unknown profile. I didn't dare open them. I couldn't. Not yet. I kept driving, the tension in my chest growing tighter with each mile I passed. The road seemed to stretch on forever, winding through dense woods. The GPS screen dimmed and a warning popped up. Connection lost. Figures. After what felt like an eternity, I arrived at the location. It wasn't anything like what I'd expected. No abandoned building, no creepy old house. Just a clearing in the middle of the woods, surrounded by trees that loomed tall and still. The only sign that this was the place was a rusted, beat-up mailbox sticking out of the ground. No numbers, no letters. Just sitting there, like a forgotten relic of something that once was. I parked the car and cut the engine, the silence wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. I could hear my own breathing, shaky and uneven. This was it. If I wanted answers, I had to get out of the car. I had to see this through. The second I stepped out, I felt it. The air was thick with something I couldn't explain. Not just the usual stillness of the woods at night, but something off. Like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I grabbed the flashlight from my glove compartment and shined it around, but there was nothing to see. Just trees, shadows, and that old mailbox. I was about to turn back, thinking this had to be some kind of twisted joke, when my phone buzzed again. This time, I couldn't ignore it. I pulled out my phone, the screen lighting up with another message from Sarah. Sarah, you're close. My heart skipped a beat. Close to what? I spun around, scanning the tree line with my flashlight, expecting to see someone standing there, watching me, but there was nothing, just the oppressive darkness and the whisper of the wind through the trees. Then, another message. Unknown. Look inside the mailbox. I didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at me to get back in the car and leave, to forget I'd ever opened that app, forget I ever matched with Sarah. But my feet moved forward, almost like they were being pulled by some invisible force. I approached the mailbox, the rust flaking off in pieces as I reached for the handle. It creaked open with an agonizing sound, and inside was a single item, a manila envelope, yellowed with age, no markings, no names, just sitting there, waiting for me. With trembling hands, I pulled it out and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in half. I shined my flashlight on it and unfolded it slowly, the paper crinkling in the dead silence. It was a photo of me from when I was a kid. I couldn't have been more than 8 years old, standing in my backyard, holding up a soccer ball with the biggest grin on my face. But it wasn't just the picture itself that sent chills down my spine. It was what was written on the back. You should have stayed away. My breathing quickened, and I stumbled back from the mailbox, dropping the photo like it had burned me. How was this possible? I hadn't seen that photo in years. It had been tucked away in some old album in my mom's attic. How did they have it? Who were they? My phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look, but I knew I had to. I swiped it open and saw the new message. Unknown. You've always been part of this. That was the final straw. I turned on my heels, sprinting back to my car, the flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand. I didn't care about answers anymore. I didn't care about the money, the app, or Sarah. I just wanted to be gone. I jumped into the driver's seat, jammed the key into the ignition, and floored it. The car roared to life, tires kicking up, gravel, as I sped back down the road. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest, I thought it might burst. My hands gripped the steering wheel, so tight my knuckles were white. I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something chasing after me. But there was nothing, just the road, stretching endlessly behind me. I kept driving, faster and faster, hoping that putting distance between me and that clearing would somehow make it all go away. Then the phone buzzed again. I almost didn't check it. Almost. But my curiosity got the better of me. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a photo of my apartment. The front door was open and the lights were on inside. I could barely make out a figure standing just inside the doorway. Before I could even process what I was seeing, another message popped up. Sarah, you can't outrun this. It's already inside. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop in the middle of the deserted road. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. It's already inside. What did that even mean? Was someone in my apartment? How? I hadn't even been home. But the figure in the photo, the door, number, this couldn't be happening. I couldn't let this happen. Without thinking, I turned the car around. I wasn't going to run anymore. I needed to face whatever this was, head on, The drive back felt even longer than the drive there. Every second felt like an eternity, my mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. Who was in my apartment? What was waiting for me when I got there? My grip tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white, as I flew down the dark road, headlights cutting through the inky blackness. By the time I reached my building, it was just past midnight. The parking lot was empty, save for a single streetlight flickering overhead. My apartment window was dark, but the front door was still ajar, just like in the photo. I parked the car and stepped out, my hands shaking. I grabbed the kitchen knife I had brought earlier from the passenger seat. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but it was the only thing that made me feel even remotely safe. With every step, the weight of the air seemed to press down on me. I could feel it. Something was wrong. Deeply, horribly wrong. I reached the door and pushed it open. Inside, the apartment was dead silent. No sounds of Jasper, no creaks of the old floorboards, just stillness. And then, from the darkness, my phone buzzed one last time. I stood there in the doorway, the silence pressing in on me like a thick, suffocating fog. My apartment was dark, save for the faint glow of the streetlight outside, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. My hand gripped the kitchen knife so tightly my knuckles ached, but it was the only thing keeping me grounded in that moment. My phone buzzed again, the sound cutting through the stillness like a knife. I didn't want to look. I knew whatever it wasn't good, but my body acted on its own, my hand shaking as I pulled the phone from my pocket. Another message from Sarah. Sarah, welcome home. My heart sank. My entire body felt like it was sinking into the floor, swallowed by the weight of those words. I scanned the apartment, my eyes darting to every corner, every shadow, expecting to see someone, something, lurking in the darkness. But there was nothing. I forced myself to take a step inside, the door creaking shut behind me. The air was thick, heavy with the kind of tension that makes your skin crawl. My heart was pounding in my ears as I flicked on the light, illuminating the small living room. It was just as I'd left it. The couch, the TV, everything in its place, except for one thing. Jasper, my cat, was nowhere to be seen. Normally he'd be waiting for me by the door, meowing for food. But tonight, nothing. The silence was deafening. I swallowed hard and called out, "Jasper." No response. No soft patter of paws. Just the stillness. Another buzz from my phone. This time, it wasn't from Sarah. It was from the unknown profile. Unknown. He's already here. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise, every instinct in my body screaming at me to leave. But I couldn't. I needed to know what was happening. I needed to end this. I stepped further into the apartment, the knife trembling in my hand. I moved through the living room and into the hallway, heart pounding in my chest. Every step felt like I was walking into a trap. My bedroom door was cracked open, just like I'd left it, but now it felt ominous, like something was waiting behind it. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open with my foot, the hinges creaking in protest. The room was dark, except for a faint glow coming from my phone on the bedside table. But there was something else. A figure sitting at the foot of my bed, just barely visible in the shadows. I froze, my blood turning to ice. It was someone, sitting there, perfectly still, back facing me. For a second, I couldn't move. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing, but none of it made sense. My apartment had been empty when I left. How had someone gotten in? Who was it? Then, the figure shifted, My breath caught in my throat as they slowly turned their head, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of their face in the dim light. It was Derek, except it wasn't Derek. His skin was pale, too pale, like all the life had been drained from him. His eyes were wide open, glassy, staring right through me. His mouth hung slightly open, lips cracked and dry, as if he'd been sitting there for days. He didn't blink, didn't move, just sat there, watching me with those dead eyes. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the knife. "Derek!" My voice was barely a whisper, cracking with fear. He didn't respond, didn't react, just stared. And then, from behind me, the faintest sound, a creak, like someone shifting their weight on the old wooden floorboards. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat, but there was no one there, just the empty hallway stretching out behind me. The shadows seemed to pulse, shift, like they were alive, waiting for me to make a move. Then, another buzz from my phone. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. I glanced down at the screen. Sarah. He's not alone. My stomach dropped. I whipped back around, expecting Derek to have moved, to have lunged at me. But he was still there, sitting at the foot of the bed, as lifeless as before. Except now, there was someone else standing behind him. A tall, dark figure, barely visible in the shadows, its outline almost too faint to make out. But I could feel it. I could feel him, watching me. I took a step back, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get out of there, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure behind Derek tilted its head slightly, like it was studying me, deciding what to do next. I was paralyzed, trapped in my own home, surrounded by things I couldn't understand, couldn't fight. Then, Derek stood up. The sudden movement sent a jolt of terror through me. He rose, slowly, stiffly, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. His head lolled to the side, and his dead eyes locked onto mine. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet as I raised the knife, pointing it at him. "Stay back," I croaked, but my voice sounded weak, hollow, even to me. Derek took a step forward, his movements unnatural, jerky, like something was controlling him. The figure behind him stayed still, watching, waiting. I couldn't do it. I couldn't stand there and let this happen. I turned and bolted down the hallway, sprinting toward the front door. I could hear footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate, like they knew there was no point in rushing. They were already inside. They were already here. I reached the door, fumbling with the lock, my hands trembling so badly I could barely get it open. The door finally swung wide, and I burst out into the night, gasping for air. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran to my car, jumped inside, and floored it, tearing down the street as fast as I could. I didn't stop driving for hours. I didn't care where I was going, as long as it was far away. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that even now, something was watching me, waiting for me to stop. I finally pulled over at a rest stop somewhere off the highway, my hands still shaking as I cut the engine. I sat there in the darkness, trying to calm my breathing, to convince myself that it was over, but it wasn't. My phone buzzed one last time. I stared at the screen, dread pooling in my stomach. It was a message from Sarah. "Sarah, you can't escape. We're with you now, forever." I dropped the phone, my entire body trembling with fear. I knew deep down that no matter how far I ran, no matter how hard I tried to escape, They would always be with me. They were inside, and there was no getting out.